Hello, everyone, and welcome to the February Champion Ops Hours with our Marketo Engage 2021 Champion class. We have Kimberly, Christina, Chelsea, and Helen here to answer all of your questions related to Marketo Engage today. We're really excited to have you all here. Just a few things before we get started with the questions. This webinar is being recorded, and we will share this with you to the email that you used for registration after the event. And during this time, if you have questions for the champions, please ask them in the Q&A box on your screen. You can post them whenever, and we will get to them hopefully by the time that this hour is over. And if you're posting on social media, please use our hashtag #MarketingNation. And so now we're going to get to the champion introductions. Kimberly, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Thanks, Jess. Hey, everybody. My name is Kimberly Galitz, and I'm the Marketing Operations Manager at Bandwidth. And I've been using Marketo for a little under 3 years now. And one of my areas of expertise is actually breaking Marketo. So if you just want any moral support for breaking things, I've got you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kimberly. Chelsea, let's go to you next.
Hi there. My name is Chelsea Kiko, and I'm the Marketing Operations Manager at McGraw-Hill. I've been a Marketo user for about 6 to 7 years, and I previously have also worked at an agency. And I would say some of my specialties is also breaking things, because we all do. But really, marketing, sales alignment, lead scoring, routing, all that good stuff to communicate to sales.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chelsea. Christina, we'll go to you next.
I'm Christina Zuniga. I'm a Senior Marketing Operations Manager at Databricks. I've been using Marketo for about 6 years now, and I just want to follow behind Kimberly and Chelsea and fix everything for them. I actually love to troubleshoot. When users make mistakes or something breaks, I love to be the person to clean it up.
Awesome. Lots of breaking specialties here. And Helen, let's go to you last.
Sure. I'm Helen Abramova. I'm Marketing Technology Lead at Verizon Business. And I've been using Marketo for about 7 years. And my specialty is overall governance, data management, compliance, making it all effective, efficient, and document everything that has been broken, fixed, and now we have it all done and documented in the right way.
Great. Thank you guys so much. So if any of you attending this webinar, if you have questions related to those specialties or areas of subject matter expertise, please put those in the Q&A box during the webinar. But we're going to get started here. The first question we have is for Kimberly. Kimberly, the question is, I'm looking for something that will help us capture firmographic and demographic data about a lead as it converts on our website. For example, we don't want to ask for state, zip code, or company size on our forms in order to keep them short, but that information would be nice for routing. You can use some third-party for enrichment tools such as Zoom Info or Clearbit to gather info on the form fields.
Yeah, so definitely recommend using those third-party tools. But one gotcha I would recommend is if you are writing information into your database from a third-party tool, to be sure to have a separate field for that. So I wouldn't overwrite anything that's currently on a record. And I also would make sure I would keep that in the third-party field so that you can have a program to decide when you write that information to your standard field. For example, if you have an industry field and it's blank, it's fine to write to that industry field. But if you have an industry field that's already populated, you wouldn't want to write over that. So you could have a Marketo program that said, if blank, then go ahead and write that in. And if not, write it to the secondary field. And that way you have your industry from the third party, but you're not overwriting any legacy data that you have. But yeah, I would research Zoom Info, Clearbit, all of those third-party enrichment tools will help you get that information and allow you to keep your form as short as you need to.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kimberly. The next question that we have is going to Chelsea. Chelsea, do you recommend progressive profiling?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a pretty common one, I feel, too. I would say it depends on what your strategy is and what the content is as well. I've used progressive profiling before for some high like sales ready forms, if you will. So I know that the action of, the customer filling out the form and maybe having some additional context to fill out is probably high. Like the conversion rate would probably be high because they're really interested in the content or the call to action behind the form. But I would say if it's like a generalized form that you're just trying to have your conversion rate be high and there isn't a big business payoff into enriching the data, particularly for that piece of content or for whatever the journey is for the campaign, I would say try to stick to short is sweet and short is better. But really, some of those long lasting forms, like maybe you have a customer care center where it's like a contact a rep, request a sample or a demo like we have here. It makes sense to maybe add some progressive profiling because, people might visit that more often and you can enrich your data. So I really would say I recommend it for certain situations. And if there's any ideal situations anybody wants to bring to the table, offline, I can always help kind of consult on that as well.
Wonderful. Thanks for that insight. The next question we have is for Christina. Christina, how should I document my instance?
Ooh, love documentation. I think as a starting point, the first thing to do is to figure out who your audience is for that piece of documentation. If you have technical setup with a bunch of diagrams and things like that about how your webhook works and where the data is going, that's probably not going to be for a user who's just cloning some templates and making emails or other programs. So it's starting off with the technical documentation separated from sort of the how-to guides and training that you give to users. I personally like things like Confluence or other systems where you can kind of make a hierarchy and connect different documents together so that it's easy for people to see the newest version and kind of to go through step by step. I always start personally with the technical documentation because then I can take that and make it much simpler for a how-to guide. For example, how my webinar program is set up and connected to Marketo Engage, and then kind of take that information, filter it down to the very basics that somebody needs to know to understand how their program will work. That's kind of how I've gotten started with documentation, different companies.
Can I add to that? I would also mention that there might be separate documentation for users and for admins, especially if you have a big complex environment. You certainly want to differentiate between what you want to share with your users and something that you want to keep for your own use and like documentation and like tracking what has been done. So that's another thing that you might consider.
Great. Thanks so much, Helen. The next question that we have is for Chelsea. The question is, I would like to get a better understanding of custom objects data. We can view them within the leads activity log, but we would really like to extract the data. Is this possible? If yes, how can this be achieved?
Yeah, custom objects definitely you have to kind of understand it. So I can answer the question first, and I can just make sure I explain custom objects from like my perspective. Sometimes it might help to hear a different way of explaining it. But as far as extracting the data, there's not an available extraction method like in the UI of Marketo. However, I do know it depends on your business purpose and the reason why you want to access the custom object data. I do know that if you have a developer on hand or possibly maybe go through Marketo too, you can get the custom object data exported through like an API connection. Again, I would try to want to know like what the benefit behind that would be. A lot of times custom object data is coming from another data platform. So you could maybe just get some of the data from that said, data platform. But there is a way for you to bulk extract via API, but you cannot export it like a smart list or something like that. And when it comes to custom objects, how I try to explain it to a lot of people is think of it like a subset of a database within Marketo. A lot of people get confused and they get tripped up on that. They think that it's on the lead object itself, but it's not. And that's also why like velocity scripting is so popular. A custom object is like a subset of data attached to what you already have in Marketo, and they don't use, you don't use any fields from field management. It's really just an additional context of your records, and it's kind of like its own mini database within Marketo itself. So if you ever want to use it for like tokens or personalization, object or activities, velocity scripting is kind of the route you want to go to do so. You can't use it within like a native token function. So that's kind of like the TLDR of custom objects. So hopefully that helped answer your question.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Chelsea. The next question is for Helen. The question is, what does Marketo consider a duplicate? I'm trying to clean up the duplicates in Marketo and sent a list to my CRM person. It looks like they're using Microsoft Dynamics. And the first name on the list only has one active record.
So duplicates are normally records that have similar email, the same email address. Basically, in Marketo, the main identifier is an email address, which is different from many different other systems, where it might be some kind of unique ID. In Marketo, it's still email address. So if the same person has corporate and Gmail or personal email, that's going to be two different records in Marketo. So this is how you can approach this, and there are multiple different ways to dedupe. Normally, you will probably need to utilize some kind of third-party tool, or there is specific service in Marketo that you can have and merge those duplicate records. But you will need to understand where the duplicates are coming from and what the reason and which data has to win. That's the biggest challenge with all those duplication and merging processes, that you need to understand how, where it's coming from, and maybe you need to fix the source, not the consequences of the problem. That's one thing. I'm not sure I fully understand the second part of the question, but if I understand it right, it's probably about we want to make sure that the first name is accurate and it's not duplicated. If someone can help me with this second part of the question, would appreciate that. But basically, if you're doing the merging, if you are fixing the data flow, generally speaking, the data is getting clean and unique in Marketo, and that should address that issue. I hope that helps.
Great. Does anyone have a follow-up for that second part? If not, we can definitely get back to the person who asked that question and figure that out.
I'm just going to take a stab at it. The only thing I can think through is, so it said, I'm trying to clean up the duplicates in Marketo and send a list to my CRM person, Microsoft Dynamics, and the first name on the list only has one active record. I'm not a Dynamics pro, but if this was a Salesforce piece, I wonder if it has to do with the lead or contact object. So what I'm hearing is the marketing automation person sent a list of the duplicates and only one showed up in Dynamics, or is the only active one. I would just say to make sure, at least from a Salesforce perspective, they see contacts and leads separately. And sometimes you'll have one in Marketo, but you might have four in Salesforce. So whenever you're merging, I would just make sure you try to ID the active one that's in that's in Dynamics and map that over to the active one in Marketo. And you can do that by the Microsoft Dynamics user ID. That would be why they wouldn't appear in Dynamics from my experience.
Great. Thanks for that clarification, Chelsea. And we are going to Christina next. The question is data cleansing or data purge. What is the best advice and recommendation to perform this task? What would be the best practice?
If you're looking to identify specific records, I kind of start off with three key things. The first is the age of the record. If you have something, depending on the age of your organization, that's 5 or even 10 years old, and it's never qualified for sales or anything like that, it's probably not going to happen. Databases, they go bad at, I think it's a rate of something like 20% or 15% a year. And so a huge number of your records, people are leaving the company and so they're no longer valid. The other thing I look at is activity. If they haven't done anything in the past year or two, seems really unlikely that they're going to suddenly decide that now's the day to start looking at your ebooks. Kind of the last thing that I also look at is how filled out is the record. If you only have first, last, and email, and they're an older record, even unless you have something like Clearbit or a similar system that's giving you more information, it seems really unlikely that you're going to be able to figure out what their industry is if they're also not interacting with you. So I kind of take those three things and say, mixture of them, which records don't make sense to keep anymore. One of the biggest pieces of advice I can give you is to partner with your sales team on this, because sometimes sales has different definitions of what they consider a cold or disqualified or dead lead. And so if you start removing leads from the system, that may remove them from their CRM as well. You can run into problems where they felt like that lead was something they wanted to keep. And so partnering with sales ops or the sales team in general to make sure that everybody agrees on the definitions and and they're okay with you removing them. Those would be my biggest pieces of advice.
Great. Thanks so much, Christina. The next question that we are going to is for Kimberly. Kimberly, the question is, recently we had a large number of errant tasks auto-created in Salesforce via our Marketo Salesforce integration, but we can't figure out why it was triggered or where in Marketo the flow step lives. Do you know if there's a way to see all jobs fired by Marketo in a given time span and see where they originated from?
Yeah, so as the queen of breaking stuff, I feel like this is a great question for me. So I'll give you a couple ways that I would do it, and then everybody else, if you have more ideas, feel free to pile them on. So first way that I would do it is I would go into global search if you have the new UI. It's very easy to use. And I've done it where I just type in task, because usually your campaign will be labeled as such, and then I'll look at trigger campaigns specifically and pull up anything that I can find that's creating tasks. Another way to do it is if you have a record of a person that had an errant task, I would go into their activity log in Marketo and find in their activity log what campaign triggered that task. And then you can click on it and open that specific one to see if that one caused it or if there's a bunch causing it. But those are two ways where you can easily just start and find where to pinpoint it in Marketo itself. And then you can go ahead and find that campaign and figure out what's going on there.
Great. Thanks so much, Kimberly. The next question is for Chelsea. Chelsea, has anyone ever connected Marketo to a homegrown CRM? If so, I want your top advice.
Sure. Yeah, I can speak to this mostly. It was somewhat of a homegrown CRM, but it eventually became kind of like a product where it was a really small CRM. So I can at least speak to that. The question is definitely a bit loaded. So I'd love to converse about this offline, because there's so much you can talk about with a homegrown CRM. But one thing that we did a lot of is, we kind of just talked about it, but we integrated a lot with the custom objects and custom activities, because what we decided was worthwhile is, this was when I was at the agency, we had a client who did not have any CRM integration. So they wanted to kind of get the bare minimum at first. And we felt the best approach to doing so was to create like a custom object integration to at least get over the data that needed to be brought over to Marketo to be able to like segment lists and be able to start to send some email campaigns. Then we advanced a little bit more to like an API type of connection where we kind of wrote via API from a field to a field. So, if you have a homegrown CRM, you're not going to have that luxury of having a native connector or, a type of connector that's on the market. You kind of have to come up with your own. So I would say you definitely need to get some development friends is the first bit of information. And you can really start to kind of, I would say, hack the system a little bit of connecting the homegrown CRM to Marketo through API integration pieces, like writing to fields that you create. But again, you really would need to have somebody who has some solid developmental skills. Hopefully that helps. That's kind of what we did with it. We just wanted to try to pilot it and see what worked first with custom objects. Was it useful? Was it helpful to us instead of like importing lists all the time? And then we advanced on to that API type of integration connection. But if you have more questions about it, feel free to ping me or, get my email from Jess, and I can always help a little bit more with that.
Great. Thanks so much, Chelsea. It looks like we are still getting some questions coming in. It looks like for one for Kimberly. The question is, can you please recommend some third-party tools for deduping?
Yeah, great question. So there are a couple I have looked at myself, just because obviously this is something people always deal with and probably always will with the amount of data and systems we're using. There's Ringlead, which is a really good tool that helps automate the deduping process for you, which is really, really helpful. In addition to that, at least for the Salesforce side, they do have something that sits in Salesforce that if a rep goes in and creates a record and didn't check first if they were in there, it pops up an error message, which is really helpful. Like, don't do this. This is a dupe. And that's helpful because you can do a lot of training, but still people are humans and therefore are going to make mistakes. So that helps at least on that side. And then, of course, as Christina mentioned, I always recommend data governance and all of that, and like having training and making sure that when you're importing lists and stuff into Marketo, you're doing your due diligence to make sure that you're checking the list and properly importing it so that it won't dupe. There's always those chances that it can. And then another tool that I would look into, again, I'm more of a Salesforce person, so I don't know about Dynamics, but for Salesforce, it's called Cloud Dingo. That's a good one that I've heard as well. So I haven't used that one myself, but that's another one people have recommended to me. So those are two really good tools. And then if you're looking into data automation, Syncery, it's like a whole new level of tool, but it houses all of your data somewhere else, and it actually helps with the deduping as well.
Great. The next question is going to be going to Helen and then to Chelsea. The question is there a way to create segmentations whereby contacts can appear in more than one segment? Similarly, is there a way to enable segmentations that are not limited by the hierarchical model of segments?
Okay, so I can start, and Chelsea, please add more if you feel. So if we are talking about one segmentation, a person cannot be more than one segment only. It's kind of like a pie that you are slicing, and a person can be only in one slice, right? However, if you have duplicates, then we have this issue. So that's my initial reaction to this question. So check that you don't have duplicates. And then if you have multiple segmentations, then I believe it's a separate pie that you are slicing, right? So make sure that we are talking about the same segmentation when we are trying to dedupe it or fix it. And in terms of hierarchical model of segments, again, I don't think that there is any out-of-box solution for that. However, I would consider something else, maybe static list, maybe smart lists, maybe something else that you can utilize for very similar outcome until you're utilizing the segmentation in the dynamic content. And then, yes, you have to use segments, right, to be able to have this type of functionality. But for many other things, you can utilize static lists and smart lists, which I myself find much more convenient for many reasons. Yeah. Chelsea, do you think there is something else you want to add?
No, I think you said it perfectly. Segmentations can be a little bit tricky. So, making sure you set it up that way, as you mentioned, I don't really have anything to add. So I'm glad we're on the same page about it.
Great. Well, it looks like a question came in for you, Chelsea, actually. And the question is, any troubleshooting recommendations for Marketo custom sync filter not working correctly? In my sync filter, I do not have synced any records over to Marketo without an email address, but some records are syncing over without an email address.
Yep. Yeah, so I actually found, I think that Mary or somebody from the Adobe team can publish a link that that I've found very useful for custom sync issues. It's a community post. And it's really, really good for understanding, because the problem with the sync issues is it can be a lot of different things. So I'll kind of speak from a general perspective. I'd be interested in knowing, is it only not working for the ones with the email address issue, or is it all of them? Like, did you test something else, a different attribute that was empty and it still, synced down to Marketo? So I'd try to do some reverse logic and see, are there other issues occurring? Next, I'm sure you went this route, but just making sure you contacted Marketo support, you got that field created. They set up the field for you. You mapped it to the lead and contact record in Salesforce or said CRM. You have it available to the sync user, like all of the, kind of legitimate things you need to do for those fields. I would make sure that you have all of that figured out as well. I do know in my past experience, I did have an interesting situation with a custom sync filter where I had the sync filter field, so like the do not sync to Marketo. And this particular client that I had, for some reason, they had an issue where it was literally cutting the sync off right away where it couldn't even read that field. So we had to add a secondary field called deleted from Marketo, and that was a Boolean field as well. So we had to go that route. And the reason that I actually knew how to go that route is the community post that we're going to link you to. So I would check that out. It has like several different articles about like mysteries of custom sync filter and things that people have learned from it. But again, I always do like a lot of regression testing, like do other situations and see what is the specific reason why, it's not working as expected. And then, make sure you have the admin set up correct. There's a lot of answers for it. So hopefully that was somewhat helpful. But, the community article is really great to look at.
Great. Thanks so much, Chelsea. The next question is going to Helen. Helen, we are doing an auto merge and discovered that Marketo ignores everything after a comma in the record. Since it's very common that company name includes a comma, what do we do? This is a critical match field.
Yeah, so first of all, I never heard of such an issue that the comma was sourcing that like ignoring situation. However, like what I would normally do, I would search everywhere online and like on Marketo community if someone maybe already resolved this issue. Also, I would try to understand, like whenever you have a situation, like when you have a problem and you have to pick an option, what those options are. Would it be easier to like go and dig into this auto merge settings and see if there is something else you can do? Or maybe you can fix, like if you don't have a lot of like how many commas you have in your company names, and maybe like it would be easier to do some kind of data cleanup and remove this comma from company names as a, like not ideal but still workable solution. And maybe you can consider something else in terms of like how you approach deduping and merging. Maybe there is another option. That's how I would approach that. Unfortunately, I don't have a clear and straightforward answer. But normally it's like always like trying to find the best possible if you don't have the ideal solution.
Great. Thanks so much, Helen. The next question is for Christina. Christina, can you still track visitors if a company uses a third-party landing page / form tool like Unbounce? I know there is a way to run a form submission in the background for Marketo forms, but wanted to know if people had experience using a third-party software that works well with Marketo.
I'm just going to give a quick disclaimer. I have not used Unbounce, but I have used other softwares where it's a landing page with a form either that connects to Marketo or is an embedded Marketo form on that page. I don't know if there's one I would recommend in particular, but yes, you can still track visitors because most of these softwares allow you to either put Marketo Munchkin onto the page so that way you're able to track anonymous and known visitors, or they allow you to put Google Analytics where you can embed Munchkin into that. And so either way, you can get the tracking that you're looking for as long as people you work within their with their cookies and permissions.
Great. The next question is for Helen. Helen, how would you compare Marketo's email deliverability tool versus a third-party one such as Litmus, Email and Acid, etc.? What are the pros and cons of this out-of-the-box deliverability tool?
So as far as I understand, Marketo's email deliverability tool is actually 250 OK. This is the tool that Marketo is partnering with. And from my experience, whenever we've been using it and when we've been comparing the outcome from other tools, it was very similar, like really, really similar. I think you can pick one or another and it should be close, like the names that are listed in this option, Litmus, email on asset, they are like pretty close in terms of what they provide. And maybe vendors would disagree, and significantly, I have not seen much difference. The only caveat here is truly being consistent and being disciplined around utilizing those, and especially as you are starting providing like actual creative, like utilizing those templates and like inputting it into the templates, and then you've tested template, but you have not tested necessarily the actual email. And this is where it can, become very challenging, and like you've done your job, you've done everything, but email is not perfect. And that's not because of the tool, it's not because how you've done your due diligence, but like how this actual template has been utilized.
Yeah, I can chime in on this one too. I feel like we all could. I'm interested to see what everybody else uses, but I think what Helen, one thing she said is really key. Just like any other tool, like don't rely on it to do good marketing practices for you. Like just because you have a deliverability tool doesn't mean you can just send it to everybody and their brother and not segment or target your audience. So I think it's really important to like get your strategy in line, and tools should really be your partner in this. We actually used to use 250 OK. I have used Litmus and email on acid, and I think Helen has a pretty good point. They're all pretty similar. I will say that some of them will package other things within their contracts. So it might be interesting to know, like, for example, we're signing on with Everest Validity, I believe right now, a new vendor. And the reason why we did that is because they package together like email verification, inbox rendering, competitive analysis. So a lot of times it might be beneficial for you to vet all the different vendors and like pick and choose. Maybe they have some bundles that would self-serve, other areas of your business. But I would think in quality of the tools themselves, I have not really heard a big difference in between them.
Does anyone, Kimberly and Christina, do you want to chime in on that question, or do you have anything to add?
I can piggyback onto what they were both saying. I like what Chelsea's saying about the strategy. I had Litmus, but that was a very long time ago. And, tools change very quickly. I have used Marketo's email deliverability tool more recently. The biggest takeaway I had was they all work really well. But if you're just including them on most sends and then you're not doing anything with that data, like Litmus can tell you whether somebody deleted it and didn't really open it, or how long, they, in general buckets, they sat and read the message. I remember us using it, but then no one took that data and said, well, why did so many people delete it without opening it, or only read it for 3 seconds? So a tool is only as good as how well you're going to use it and whether you're going to take the results from that and actually make meaningful change in your organization.
Great. Kimberly, anything to add, or should we move on to the next question?
I think you can move on.
Okay, cool. So it looks like we're working through some of these. The one question that, Chelsea, you may be able to direct them somewhere else. The question is, we integrated with PFL for direct mail campaigns. Do you have experience with setting up such campaigns? If yes, how has your experience been? Is there someone that we can follow up with for that question?
Yeah, I do have someone. I will make sure that said someone has the time to answer the question before I kind of, commit their name to it. But yeah, I think if we want to do like a follow-up, Jess, after this, I don't know if we communicate with these, but I guess one thing I would say is, usually with PFL or different vendors, like they should have some type of direct integration with Marketo. So whenever you do set that up in Marketo, like you should be able, like any other native integration, to like trigger upon that. Actually has a little bit of experience doing this. So Kimberly, I don't know if you want to kind of chime in as well.
Yeah, so definitely back in the day before I was a Marketo admin, but I had a team that used them and did a lot of marketing around them. I will say, definitely to Chelsea's point, there's probably an integration or a webhook of some sort. So obviously being sure to test that. But overall what your experience is how much effort you put into building out the campaign. You can trigger off anything, but in order for a direct mail campaign to be successful is really building out from start to finish and having concrete KPIs, what you're trying to accomplish with it, because I think we all have suffered from putting in tools to try and get us a quick win and then not really been successful. PFL and all those direct mail tools are really great and can help aid in setting meetings or closing deals. So making sure whatever you're using it for, you have the ability to report on it. So if you need to set something up in Marketo that triggers or captures that information as they're going through the flow, be sure to have that all set up before you start the campaign. So just overall generic, like make sure you have your ducks in a row before you turn it on. And I realized that that was the key to our success when we were using it.
Great. Thanks so much, Kimberly. If you are attending the webinar, please send in a question into the Q&A box if you have one. But in the meantime, let's just do a round robin for everyone. And you can go through your best tips that you may have or best practices for beginning users for Marketo.
I can kick us off. I would say definitely going to stuff like this, attending mugs if you can, has really been super helpful to me. And then something I've done, and I'll just keep riding this, I make mistakes and thing all the way through the end here. If you do make a mistake, we all make mistakes, right? So document what you did and how you would change it for next time, so that when you're going through this process and someone else joins your team, you guys both understand what caused that, or can documenting this help you prevent something in the future. So I'm really, really big on making sure to own my mistakes and just fix them for next time. So it's how we all learn and get better. But that's definitely something that I've done and is my suggestion for everybody out there, to just own it. And we're all human and you won't make that mistake twice. So it's okay.
Great. Thanks so much. Christina, do you want to go next?
Sure. My number one tip would be to find a Marketo mentor or a buddy, somebody who's experienced, whether they're at your company or maybe through the community or going to a user group, is a great way of finding somebody like this who can help give you some advice, someone experienced that you can ask questions to. I had a few of those when I got started with Marketo, and I still keep in contact with them because you never know what information people have buried in their minds that they can share with you. And they don't always do things like post on community or write blogs, but they can often give you some really good advice. So my advice is find a Marketo mentor.
Great. Thanks so much, Christina. Helen, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, I'm fully in agreement with like following people, being on community, listening, watching. I would also say being comfortable in a situation where you're getting to a point where you're just like getting so tired and irritated and like everything is wrong and like I don't make any sense of what's happening here. And just like this is part of the journey. You really need to kind of break some ice and like glass and like whatever around, and spend some time and like, unstructured, fully, like you're just like diving into some specific area and you're trying to get to the bottom of it. Either you're troubleshooting and you are going into all directions, like you're following all your, like ways of, understanding the situation, investigation of it, or you are looking from a data flow perspective. And again, you are like truly dedicating some time into going into that. So I think having those like very deep dives is extremely important. And this is where you gain this confidence that like maybe you don't understand it now, but you can get it. That would be my tip.
Love that advice, Helen. Thanks so much. And Chelsea, let's finish up with you.
Yeah, everybody's points have been really great. So I kind of agree with everything everybody said already. Another thing too that I did, and others alluded to this, is just be a self-starter, a self-learner. you're never going to get anywhere in life if you say nobody taught me how to. Like when people say like, nobody taught me how to do that. Like, I don't know, it's like a pet peeve of mine. Well, sometimes you just have to learn yourself. So you have to go through situations, you have to learn from it. So I think doing that, like, don't just rely on your managers or your peers, or, you know, a mentor to answer the questions for you. Dig around and try to find it yourself. And I'm sure a lot of the other champs can say this too. Like the only reason I learned is because I made mistakes. I read articles, I read community posts, and I just taught myself. Like nobody ever really gave me, you know, a crash course. So I think having the right mindset's important too when you're starting.
Yeah, I love that, Chelsea. And that's how a lot of you have gotten to the point that you're at as champions. So really appreciate that comment. The next question that we are going to is for Christina. Christina, the question is, what are best practices for syncing to Salesforce?
Ooh. I feel like this could be an entire webinar in just one question, so I will try to keep it as brief as I know how. I would say most organizations agree that the source of truth comes from Salesforce. And so making sure that you're aligning to the field values, the rules and guidelines coming from that system has always been something I've tried to do. I know a lot of people ask the question, should I be holding back records in Marketo before I send them to Salesforce, or should I hold back records in Salesforce before I send them to Marketo, or should it be a one-to-one? I'm not going to lie, I have a preference. It's a one-to-one. But every company is different, and so they have different use cases. I understand that sometimes you want it one way or another. I've personally always found that one-to-one makes it so that your duplicate situation does not get out of control, because once you try to hold stuff back, that's when duplicates happen and it's painful. I would say if I could give one piece of advice for syncing to Salesforce is after you've set it up, go and watch your notification center like a hawk. Every single morning, that is the first thing I do is I go to my notification center in Marketo to see, did anyone not sync over? Am I getting alerts that something is wrong? I do this because I'm still not over this. A little over a year and a half ago, my Salesforce to Marketo connection broke for 10 days. Nothing could sync. And actually, both Marketo and Salesforce had never seen the break happen that way. I'm traumatized. But it all happened because I had a not one-to-one. I was holding some records back in Salesforce, and one person made one mistake in Salesforce and made that filter field not visible to Marketo. Marketo kind of freaked out and was like, how do I know which records to look at? Understandably. And ever since then, we've been really on top of our Salesforce sync. So that would be the number one thing, is make sure everybody knows, if you have something like that set up, what the rules are around it, how you share fields, what fields are most important, like that one, and making sure that every morning that notification center says 0. It's how you know you're doing it right.
I feel like you needed some like Sarah McLachlan music in the background during your story. Like, like those pet commercials. Like I just had to chime in there. Like the way that you said it, you like pause and you're like, about a year ago. Jess, we need some background music for future webinars.
I needed to pick my dog up like a therapy pet. It was upsetting.
Yeah, I feel like I want to give a hug.
Yeah, Christina needs to log off. She needs a moment.
Well, sorry for that traumatic experience, Christina. We're all here for you. And thanks for explaining those top tips when it comes to that sync. The next question is for Kimberly, and it looks like maybe you could possibly share a link to help explain this question. But the question is there a way to track if a lead visited a PDF document?
Yeah, this is a highly discussed topic between the champs for sure. So I can definitely share a link. But the basic idea is to keep that tracking between the download button and the PDF on an interstitial page. So there is a way to do it. I will say you probably need a developer to help you because, well, at least for me, it's beyond what I feel comfortable doing. But definitely something you can do. It just takes an extra step in between that download and that PDF, since you can't obviously put Munchkin on a PDF. So yeah, there are definitely ways to do it. We will share the links. And also I would keep up to date on this topic because things are always really changing with tracking and all of that stuff. So I would follow the community if you can and keep an eye out for this kind of stuff to change. And this is actually Sanford's link, and he's really good about posting updates when things change. So keep an eye out for that.
Great. Thanks so much for that advice, Kimberly. The next question that we have is for Chelsea. Chelsea, do I need a prospect and customer lifecycle model or just one? How should I manage this across different products?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I keep going back to, again, the business need, but that's how I make a lot of my decisions. So I guess sometimes I frame it a different question. If you had both of those, what would you do with it? Like if you had a prospect and a customer life cycle, what would you do with it? How would you report on it? Personally, I would say try to keep the life cycles as limited as possible. And you can use other fields to attribute like what product line it is. And you can do that on the back end for like your reporting. For example, let's say you have a full one customer life cycle where it's prospect to, your closed one or your closed lost or customer. You could, report on the steps along the way for like the whole multi-touch attribution piece. But then within your reporting, you could layer on a field of like their product interest or, some type of extra detail where you can categorize that in your reporting. I'm not a huge fan of a life cycle for product line, but that's me. I think others have some opinions here and we can go to them. But I think that a lot of what we do is we manipulate on the reporting end. So for example, I can filter down in, we handle portfolios here at McGraw-Hill. So let's say it's elementary school portfolio. We add that as an option to our reporting. Like give me everybody who's considered an MQL or a sales prospect in this portfolio. And we add it into our reporting metrics because our stakeholders are the ones that use that the most. So we don't really have, however you can do it to make it work to the stakeholders is really what's best. And we have some Tableau experts in-house. So that's how we usually handle things. I think I like to keep it as simple as possible. And then you can layer on additional fields or detail or program memberships. But that's my take on it. I think Kimberly might've mentioned that she has, some other ideas too.
Yeah, definitely agree with everything Chelsea said. Doing it on the reporting level keeps you from having to update a lot of stuff in Marketo. And I try and keep the more complicated programs in Marketo, to leave them alone as often as I can. But something you can do is you can do scoring across different products. That's something that we've utilized because it is hard then to take your person status or account status in your report and then break it into product. So that's something that's pretty easy lift in Marketo to implement once you have all that information available. So that is something that you can always layer on top of your life cycle, is having a product scoring as well. And I know that there's going to be presentations coming up on that in the Houston Mug, I think, tomorrow. And then Kiara is actually presenting at the Marketo All-Star thing in March. So maybe don't miss that.
Yeah. Both great assets and resources and events that are coming up that people can attend. And we can also follow up with links to those in our follow-up email if you guys would like. The next question that we have is for Helen. Helen, looking for suggestions for setting up a double opt-in campaign.
So we are talking about GDPR, basically. So double opt-in, for those who probably are not very comfortable with this terminology, is a situation for 3 specific countries, Germany, Poland, and I believe it's Greece, that require double opt-in. So basically, not only you need to obtain their explicit consent, but they also have to click on your follow-up email to confirm that they are happy with you sending out marketing emails to them. So I would suggest that you probably need some kind of like basic consent field, right? Some kind of like baseline. And then you want to have something like single opt-in. And single and double opt-in, those two very custom fields will be utilized for those countries only. So when someone is coming from those countries and they are filling out your form, they will be put into this single opt-in status. And then once they sent out, like once they click through then you move them to this double opt-in status, positive or true or whatever it is in your Marketo instance. So that's kind of like this 3 steps kind of approach that I think would be very, very helpful. And there are tons of recommendations and tons of advice out there. So certainly go and check and see what works for you. And for sure, test it and check with your legal partner, because whatever we are doing, we need to make sure that we are providing the right and legally safe process.
Great. Thanks so much for that advice, Helen. The next question is for Kimberly. Kimberly, do you use nested programs in engagement streams often? I was going to use it to resend emails if not opened, but wondering if you have any nested program use cases that you like.
Yeah, great question. We actually do use nested programs for timing. So we have, based on activity, whether or not people receive emails like at a slower pace, a medium pace, or a really fast pace. And that's obviously all based on how they interact with the emails they're getting. But the only real way to achieve that is to do nested programs in an engagement stream. So that's one that I think is really cool and really useful for everybody.
Great. And the next question, I think everyone could answer, have a few tips for areas of the community that you can kind of go into. But the question is, could you please provide community names or user groups? Just as a preface, I will definitely send out the link to join Mugs in the follow-up email, so you guys can follow that. That's the new platform that we are using for our Marketo user groups. And given the fact that we are in the middle of the pandemic, you can join any of those virtually. So depending on the topics or the subject matter that different Mugs may be having, you can check that out. But if the 4 of you want to kind of give some advice or any areas of the community that you think would be helpful to check out, I think that would be helpful advice.
Yeah, I can start us off. Yeah, I think as far as the user groups, Jess, that's great to kind of send that out. But another thing I'll kind of note about that is a lot of us, and I say us because I lead the Cleveland one, so we're a tight-knit community, just like the champions. I would say a lot of them are promoting to everybody, which is really great. I know Kimberly, I think you mentioned like Chiara, like different people that are presenting this week, even on Mugs. So I would make sure you visit and see the Mugs that are being presented, because right now, just because, for example, I lead the Cleveland Mug, we're letting our Mugs be, go out to everybody.
Okay, I'll jump in. I don't know if anybody can hear me. I think we're having some audio issues, but
Yep.
You're good? Okay, cool. Yeah, everything that Chelsea said, fully agree. Because it's virtual right now, like take advantage of these different topics that we're all talking about. And it's a great way for you to get your feet wet in the community and become more involved, and maybe find a mentor like Christina was saying. So that's a great place to do that.
Yeah, and I also think that, I'm jumping ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, Helen. Sorry.
Yeah. So I think that once you're like getting familiar and comfortable in the community like on a broader scale, right? Like whenever you are Googling your Marketo question, you are kind of finding people who are like specifically writing about that and blogging, and there might be videos, and there might be some like, some third-party, platforms that they are utilizing to sharing their knowledge. So I would suggest like looking for those subscribing, following, and listening to those people. And there are tons of podcasts now. Like, it's just like enormous amount. So finding your like areas what you would love to learn more specifically, because like, it's overwhelming very quickly. So maybe like having some specific goals, like what you want to learn as your next like 6-month time span, and go from there.
Great. Christina, any other tips that you have or areas of community you can speak to?
I like what Helen was saying. And when you're searching, there are so many more technical or less technical or very specific ones. Like, I like to follow Sandy White's technical blog. I'm not as technical. I don't think many people are as technical as he is, but it's always interesting to see what he posts and see if it's something that would work with my organization. Or some of the champions like Josh and Grace have just an awesome time giving a lot of information. Or some of older pieces, like, is it Marketo Fu that Joe did? So there's so many resources out there that are available for people if you just take the time to go track them down.
Great. Thanks, everyone. We have about 4 minutes left. I'm not sure if anyone wants to send in last-minute questions. But in the meantime, I think it might be fun. Kimberly, I know that you said that you're an expert at breaking things. If you could tell us a story about, or an instance that you fixed something that broke.
Yeah, I have a great one that just proves how human I am. I set up a whole new lead scoring model and like launched it on a Friday at 5, which like people were like, that was the dumbest thing ever. All weekend to fix it. But I started getting in my inbox like Salesforce sync errors and like something I'd never seen before. And they just started rolling in, and it was literally Friday at 5. And I just shut my laptop, put it in my backpack, and went home, because that's what champs do. But it was just because I panicked and I was like, I don't know what to do. But what I did when I like calmed down a second is I went home and I just kind of researched what was happening. And it turns out it was luckily not a super big deal, but it triggered something on the Salesforce workflow side that I didn't know existed and caused everybody to get these notifications. So nothing was actually broken, but obviously it looked like it, and it was a panic moment. But that's why I think Christina made the point earlier that your involvement with sales ops and the Salesforce side is very important, because they have things running that you probably don't know about and you could easily break if you change something. So just communicating like, hey, I'm going to update this. Does this affect any workflows we have in place is like a great question that now I always ask before making big changes, because I don't ever really want that to happen again.
Love that story. Thanks so much, Kimberly. Does anyone have another story of fixing something that you broke yourself before we end the webinar?
It's not necessarily a story, but what I normally do, I never run anything full swing immediately. I'm like taking like 1% subset of the database and run through something and check what's happening. So like it's like, and not at the top of my mind, but I probably have similar situation that Kimberly had when, you're doing something and it's just like, you have no idea what was going to happen. So that's why I'm saying like either it's always a sandbox or it's a small subset. And then I'm like waiting and like listening what's happening, like just like if there are any screams happening or if there are some like error notifications I'm getting. And then I'm doing it, the whole thing.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Helen. And it looks like we're almost at time here. Just wanted to say thank you to the 4 of you for participating in this month's Champion Office Hours. And for all of you attending, we will be sending out an email later on this week with those resources that we spoke to during this webinar, as well as the link for the entire audio. So if you do have any questions, please reach out to us at advocacy@adobe.com. And we'll try and get those additional questions answered. But thanks, everyone, for joining, and we'll hopefully see you next month.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.